In this video, we will explore some key count functions and some very important sum functions. So counting, when you have a huge or large data set, can be, a pretty daunting task. So you need some of these functions to be able to count based on certain criteria or to sum based on certain criteria. So when the functions that we will look at, we'll look at the Countif and the Countifs, and I will go in details in a bit. And we'll also look at the Sumif and the Sumifs. So when we talk about high level, Countif is when you're counting, the if is a criteria, count if this. And if it's just one criteria, then you can use Countif. If you're trying to count given certain criteria, like multiple criteria, then you will have to use the Countifs. Now it's more than one, so that's why you add the S there, Countifs. So you have like multiple ifs in there. You have multiple conditions. In the same lens, if you're summing and you need just to sum with just one criteria, then sum if. Now, if you're summing and you have multiple criteria, then you have sum ifs. So when summing with multiple conditions, think about the sum ifs as the plural, multiple conditions, and then the count ifs as the plural of the count. So I'll show you how this works. It's more fun with the function. So let's say we have this data set, which is, companies ranked in terms of revenue, the top 100 companies, and we want to use a count if to count the number of countries that are located in the country here. So we're trying to see in these top 100 companies, what's the distribution when we look at them in terms of countries. So we want to count in the first one here for US, and then we want to count how many located in Saudi Arabia and so on. So what we need to do first is the count if function equal, that's how we always start our function, equal count, that's the one there. But we want to count if, so we type if and then we open brackets. Where is our range? Our criteria is countries, right? So in the data set here, we will need to select this range where we have all of these countries, right? Then because we want this range to stay the same regardless of how we drag this, we have to absolute reference it. Absolute reference is activated using the F4 key. You put the dollars in front of the letter and the number. That's how you absolute reference something. Then you put a comma here. Now that tells the function that you're ready to go to the next thing. Now, what is the next thing? The criteria. What is our criteria? Our criteria is what we want to count. We want to count USA in the first one. Now, USA is in a column also. So we want the countries to stay in this column. We don't want, when we pull it, we don't want it to keep moving, right? So we have to reference the column. So that's putting the dollar in front of the letter. Press enter. So 39 companies in these 100 are all located in the US. Wow. Then the next thing is you could just drag it because I don't want it to mess up that part there. I'll just drag it like that. So now this is the total distribution. I don't even need to do anything else. It's just coming over here, reading it, and then counting it. So we can just put a sum here equal that. So the total 100. So you see, we've pulled every single company and bucketed it into the country that it belongs to, right? Now that is if we're just looking at one criteria, US. Now we have multiple. So what do? We want to now say in this count, some are big, mid, small. What is the distribution for US and each of these other countries? So now we have a count ifs, and the count ifs is, you add that, this is the one. So count ifs, literally when you start typing COUN, it will show up. So you could just double click on it and it will just open up count ifs. So what do we want to count? This is the criteria range 1. Our first criteria is the country, and then the second criteria is the size. So we have country, and this is the class. So country is our first criteria, so we select all of this, reference. So now we have the criteria range 1. What is the criteria 1? Since we have our criteria 1, and you could switch this anyhow, but since this is the first criteria that we pick, then the criteria is going to be this. So we want it to stay in the column still. And then the next thing that we want to do is we select the second criteria. We want the second criteria to be the size or the class. So we select this range. We absolute reference it. And why we reference is because we don't want our range to keep moving. We press comma. We're ready to pick the next criteria. 2 is the size. And this, we want to keep the row the same. So we put the dollar in front of the number. Then we close it and we do that. So now we are ready to drag this way. And then we're ready to drag it down. So if you put a sum here and you drag it this way, you could just put another sum here, but drag it down, and then you could put a sum here. So what do you see? We did a count. We had 100. We broke it into pieces, big, mid, and small. We have 100 here. The US is 39. We decided to break it into pieces. We have 39. So this is way much more information than you could hope for, and it's so summarized in just quick functions. We're able to summarize all of this into this. So this is one way to look at. So if you were thinking about this, then you see most of the companies that most of the companies that are in the top 100 here are from the US, and then next is China, and then the other one is Germany, and then the rest are literally, you could bucket them into orders. So Japan does have 7, so it also stands out. So that's how you use the Countif and the Countifs. Now let's go further and look at how we can use the Sumif. Now the Sumif, you use the Sumif function to sum values in a range that meets the criteria that you specify. So basically, it's now summing, not counting. So that's kind of one key difference. So the Sumifs adds all of its arguments that meet multiple criteria. So this is a single one. This is multiple. So now we will write the Sumif, SUM. Then if you put that, it shows up. And then what is the range? So here, what we want to sum is revenue, but we want to make sure that the revenue criteria is by country. So here is the range is here. We want to select that, absolute reference it. We've done this many times now. Now what's the next thing that we want to do? The next thing, if you look there, it shows you criteria. So you need to feed it what criteria. I want to sum it by the country. Then what do I need to do? I need to make sure that the column doesn't change. And then I want to pick the sum range. We're trying to sum what? The revenue. If we wanted to sum the price, it will be the column E. So this one too, we need to absolute reference it. Just press F4 on your keyboard and then close the bracket and press enter. Now here we go. So you drag that. So now we have, if you look at the formula, it's pulling right. Then we just need to put the sum here. Now, we now have solved for the sum if. Now we have, for every country, we have the amount of revenue that is generated by the companies that make up this list. So we'll format that. We have it currency, but I don't want to put currency yet. I want to put none, but I want a decimal place. Okay. Now we want to see of these revenues that are generated in each of these countries, what belongs to big, mid, and small. We want to bucket them now. So we have 2 criteria. We have now the country where the company belongs to, or the country that the company is in, and also what is the size, like what is, what bucket does it belong to here. So 2 conditions here. So we have this 2 and this. So now that's why we need the sum ifs, because the sum if only has one condition, and in this case we just did one with just the country. So here is the sum ifs. So we type that, and then just sum ifs, that's that. And you start with the sum range in this one. It's kind of the opposite of the prior one. What's our sum range? It is revenue. That's what we're trying to sum. Okay? And we need to just make sure we absolute reference it so it doesn't keep running around. That will mess up everything. And then you type comma here. Now you see the criteria that you're trying to pick. So what's the first criteria? We want to stick with country first. So we have criteria range is always in your data set. Now criteria range 1 is here, country here, right? And we will absolute reference that, press your F4, and then criteria 1 is country, US. We want to make sure we reference the column absolute reference, relative reference, the column US, because otherwise it will move if we drag the formula. So we want to keep the column the same. So when it comes to Saudi Arabia, it stays there and all the way down. Now we need criteria range 2. What is the criteria range 2? We said is the size. So here it is, or the class, and then absolute reference it, then comma. What is that criteria? We want it. We have 3 classes or ranking, if you may, and they are over here. So I want this one. So I press on that, and then I want to make sure that it stays in the row because the data that we have for the class is in rows. So we have written this whole function just to show you this is the sum, and this is the criteria range, and this is the first criteria, which is country over here, and then the second criteria here, criteria range 2, is the class, and then we just have the criteria that it's going to pull it by. So we've set 2 criteria here. So you now click enter. You've now written your function, drag it down, and just drag it all the way. It's well anchored. So basically, you don't have to worry about anything. It's already easy to just drag it. That's what happens when you write a function the correct way. Everything is auto-filled. So we just sum this and just drag it all the way here, and then we come over here and we sum that and drag it all the way down. So what do you notice? You notice that this number here, which is the sum of the revenue using the sum if, is equal to the sum here. If you wanted a check figure, you could just do this minus this. It should be 0, just the same way as this minus this should be 0. And also, if you wanted to do an overall check, you could take this number here minus the sum of all of this revenue down here. That's one thing that if you're an analyst, you should be very good at, creating those check figures. So now we know this 17,874 billion ties with the total data set. Plus, when we wrote the sum if, we had 17,874, and then we broke it into big, mid, small companies, and then we still tied. If you look at US in the sum if, we had 7,662 billion, and then the same thing here. And each of these countries, we had the same numbers here. If you were to put a check figure here, they will all tie. So it's all 0. So that tells you your work is right. You could do the same thing for this one. So basically, we've looked at, how to use the Countifs for multiple conditions. We've used the sum if for one criteria. And if you have multiple criteria, then you use sum ifs. And these functions help you count units of something or on one condition or multiple conditions, or sum based on one criteria, or when you have multiple criteria. So these are very powerful tools to use when you're summarizing data, or when you're pulling data into your model, when you're summarizing a huge data set. Your manager won't even spend, a minute looking at this, and they will see insight. It's clear to see that, most of the big companies are only, in this field here. So the smaller companies make up most of this information, as you can see. So if you wanted to see, for example, what's the distribution, you could just see, okay, big companies here as a function of the total. You need to reference that, as I said earlier, otherwise it will start moving around. So if you wanted to see that distribution, so 74%, of this revenue, it belongs to the small companies. 15%, of the companies fall under big, and 12 fall under mid. So it's most of the companies are actually very small, based on our ranking. And the same thing, you could decide to come over here and say, okay, so what's my distribution? You take the big company here divided by the total 100, and you need to absolute reference this. And then you do that. I wanted to show you something if I didn't reference this like the way I do, because I keep saying and I didn't show you what's going to happen. If I didn't reference this and I drag that, see what happened? It starts going over there and it starts moving. So the reason why I can actually use, do the work right is if I reference things that shouldn't be moving. So we know that if we do this and we reference that number, it shouldn't be, total shouldn't change. Everything is a function of the total. So we just drag that. So you just change it to percentage. 89% of the companies in this fall under small, 6% mid, and 5% big. So most of the companies are small. That's what this distribution says. So basically now you know how to use the Countifs, sum and Sumif and Sumifs. Now, one of the bonus, the last thing I want to leave you with is if you just wanted to know the total count of something, you could use the CountA. This is a quick way to just, CountA. What CountA does is it just goes here and just says, okay, well, what is the total of all cells that have data in them? So I want to count everything all the way down here. So it will say 100 because the total number of companies we have here is 100. Another cool thing to know also is you can write a Sumif function with conditions set directly into the formula. So you have Sumif, then you can just have all of the revenue here. Let's do that. So we want to select all of this. Let's take that back. And what we want to do is we want to say, let me see what condition is more fun. All revenues that are greater than 300. So I'm going to have, I'll type that quotation greater than 300. I'll close it and then a bracket. So what this is going to do is it's going to go into all of the data that I selected, and it's going to sum the revenue for all the companies that have revenue greater than 300 billion. So let's do a quick test. This is greater than 300 billion, so it is 4715.3. 4715.3. So now you know how powerful, the Countifs, CountA, sum and Sumifs functions can be. Give me feedback on what you think. Thank you.